Hello there, my friends. It's good to be with you. Salamun alaikum. I want to share with you some of my recent research that I've been engaged in, and something that has really vexed me, that has puzzled me, and that has put me in a huge quandary. And I didn't know how to process this. You see, the approach I have, and which I shared with you on this channel over the years, is that we have a rational Qur'an, we have a rational religious, philosophical understanding of the world, and that gives us an amazing way to check and to cross-check whether what we take from the Qur'an, whether it actually is the right understanding. Now let's apply that to the idea of miracles. In particular, a verse that I came across when I was translating chapter 26 of the Qur'an, which is called, the chapter is called the Poets, Shu'ara. And in that chapter, it deals with the story of Musa, the prophet Moses, and the episode of him encountering Pharaoh and, inviting Pharaoh to change his outlook on the world. And also it includes the story of the pursuit of Pharaoh, the escape of the Israelites from Egypt, and that whole episode. And so now, in particular, the question that I came across and that really troubled me was the translation of verse 63 of that chapter, right? So it's chapter 26, verse 63. And let me first show you how that particular verse is translated. Let me just show you that first. Yeah, this is the verse. Take a look at this verse here. Muhammad Asad, he translates this verse as follows. Thereupon we inspired Moses, thus, strike the sea with thy staff, whereupon it parted, with each part appeared, and each part appeared like a mountain vast. Clear Qur'an, Mustafa Khattab, he translated as follows. So we inspired Moses, strike the sea with your staff, and the sea was split. Each part was like a huge mountain. Then Safi Kaskas says, he translated as follows. Then we revealed to Moses, strike with your staff the sea. It parted, and each part looked like a mountain. So that is the tone of the translations. Now why, Anwar, why do you have a problem with this translation? You see, the logic of the Muslim, and the challenge that we face when we want to problematize, or when we want to question this, is, are you questioning God's capacity or his ability to do anything? Because that is what we are confronted with. Spreading the sea, opening a pathway through the sea. And of course, if you answer yes, then you are questioning God or God's power. If you say no, then it means you have to accept that God has done this, indeed, spread the ocean. But why do I have a problem with this? Why do I have an issue with this? You see, for me, an act such as lifting the sea up, picking up the ocean, in other words, it's probably the most dramatic and symbolic display of ultimate or utter power and majesty would be for somebody to lift the ocean out of where it is. I mean, do you see what I mean? And so I think what the translators, what we all want to do is to flatter God, right? To flatter God, to make him understand. We're happy to know that at one point in history, you picked the ocean up and put it out of the way and allowed Moses to cross. But the problem is, how many Israelites were there 1,000, 10,000, 20,000? The big question, which is the insidious test of your faith, of your understanding, of your admission of God. The most insidious and creeping questioning of your faith will be when somebody then says, so why can't God do that to all these Palestinians? Why can't your God part the sea or part whatever and clear a way for the Palestinians to cross? Are they not his people? Of course they're his people. I mean, they believe in the Qur'an, they believe in Muhammad alayhi salam, they are the righteous people. Why is God not doing the same for them? Or for any other nation in history that God loved and that was afflicted by an oppressive power such as was the case with the Israelites. And that, my friends, is the more troublesome question. Now, how are you going to answer the question? You know, if somebody says to you, listen, God parted the ocean for the Israelites, but he has subsequently not done it for anyone else. You know, I'm as a Muslim who believes in God and who loves my Creator and who is grateful and eternally indebted to my Creator and wants to worship Him and wants to love Him and wants to serve Him. I will still challenge Him. I'll write a letter of complaint. I will object if I am faced with Him one day. If He tells me, Anwar, why did you not do righteous or act righteously or whatever, or believe that Moses, you know, that we opened the ocean for Moses, I will say, but my Lord, my Master, my Creator, my Sustainer, my Rabb, I couldn't believe that you would show such injustice to the rest of the world, the rest of believers, the rest of your ibad, of your subjects, that you would only save one group of your subjects at one moment in history and forever after refuse to do so. And for that reason, I cannot buy this story. Right, but now you're going to tell me, yeah, but Anwar, it's in the Qur'an. You have to believe it. Yes, now that is why I then looked at the text. I looked at the Qur'an and I read again and again and again. And I'm not saying I read it so that I can explain away the meaning. No. I'm not like those people on the internet who explain away the Qur'an. No, I have too much fear for my Lord and my Creator to do that. And if the explanation there is clear, it is unambiguous, I will have no. The challenge will be mine then to make sense of it. In this case, I was busy translating chapter 26, verse 63. And I looked at all the translations, right? All of them. I looked at what they are saying, and they all say the same thing. And you can go through it, and it says that the ocean parted, and it was like two mountains. And I thought, where did they get this image? Because certainly the verse, that the text doesn't say the sea was like two mountains. It doesn't say that, you know. It's an image that has to be in your mind before you read the Quran. And then I realized I've seen this image. And where did I see this image? In the great classic movie with Charlton Heston, I think, that covers the story of Moses. And this is where I seem to remember this image from. Just check out this image for a few moments with me.
The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. Behold his mighty hand. opens the sea with the blast of his nostrils. Lead them through the midst of the waters. His will be done.
He opens the waters before them, and he bars our way with fire. Let us go from this place. Men cannot fight against a god.
Better to die in battle with a god than live in shame.
Raise God and down into it!
And so that is the story that we see. That is the story that we see in the image that is conjured up when these translators do the translation of chapter 26 verse 63. And of course the movie itself that you see there with Charlton Heston recreating a Hollywood recreation of the parting of the Red Sea is of course based on the Old Testament, on the book of Exodus. And in the book of Exodus in the Bible, it then describes this miraculous parting of the ocean, and that's in the Torah, in the Old Testament. So why, Anwar, are you coming here and you are questioning something which is in the Old Testament? It is clearly the translators have all translated in one thing, and now you want to have a problem with it. What the hell is wrong with you? My friends, like I say to you, it is the more insidious question of why save one portion of his servants, which in this case was the Israelites, and not offer that type of amazing, powerful, majestic show of power to us. I mean, we can rightfully complain. One day when we face him, we can say to him, my God, you gave Moses' people such powerful, supernatural signs. Why did you give us nothing? And so you can't judge us like you judged them. So here comes the facts, right? And I want to move now from, I think I've sketched the problem for you, the issue of what we are dealing with and why it became a problem for me. But it was a problem for more than that. I looked, when you look at the Qur'an, generally the Qur'an refers to certain big, massive naturals or signs that were made available, like even in the time of Moses, the changing of the rod of the staff of Moses into a snake. Now, first of all, I'm not against the idea of miracles. I mean, miracles are highly improbable, almost impossible odds that are sort of that happen to occur. So, okay, the Qur'an describes the changing of the rod of Moses into a big sign, a massive sign for Pharaoh. But the Qur'an never describes the crossing of the so-called Red Sea as a big sign. It never applies that type of grand adjective or description to the parting of the Red Sea. The parting of the Red Sea is almost treated like matter of fact in the Quran. There's a few verses. There's this verse here, chapter 20 verse 77. It's a very straightforward verse, and it says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَلَقَدْ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى أَنْ أَسْرِي بِعِبَادِي فَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ طَرِيقًا فِي الْبَحْرِ يَبَسًا لَا تَخَافُ دَرَكًا وَلَا تَخْشَى. We divinely communicated to Moses, set out at night with my servants and strike for them a dry path. First issue that I want to clarify is the Quran describes the sea or the water body that was crossed as a river. The Quran describes the water that was to be crossed by the people of Moses as a yam. That's the Arabic word. At some places it's called a yam. At other places it's called a bahr. Now if you go to the dictionary and you find out what is the meaning of the word yam and what is the meaning of the word bahr, I'm not going to do it now. You find out that the Arabs regard both as pertaining to a huge lake, a big river, or to the ocean. Yam is more particular to river. So when the Qur'an uses the word yam, that God parted the yam, you know that word, the river, then it particularly points to a river. And when it uses the word bahr, like in this verse, you have to assume that it is now extending, the same body of water. It was called a yam in a different verse. Here it is called a bahr. So it is still the same body of water. So bahr or yam in the Qur'an refers to river. And this is something I encountered many, many years ago when I was in Egypt. I spoke to some experts there and people who had an understanding, and I was already there made aware that the Qur'an claims that Moses crossed the river, not the sea, not the Red Sea. And that is something that you cannot deny. You cannot come to the Qur'an and insist it is the Red Sea that was crossed. The Qur'an uses the word yam, which is river primarily, or it uses the word bahr, which also includes the idea of a big or wide expanse of river. And so I was already at that time, many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, I was already comfortable that Moses never, in the story of the Exodus or the exit from Egypt, it was never crossing the Red Sea. I mean, crossing the Red Sea is just something completely different. The Red Sea at its narrowest point would be sort of, I think, like 20 or 50 or 80 kilometers. So we are not talking about something that is a joke. I think you can go and look up what is the narrowest point. I think it is the point between Yemen and Eritrea, or Yemen and Abyssinia. I think that is actually the narrowest point, But the rest of the Red Sea is just not a joke to cross. It is a huge and wide place to go and walk across. And for God to have lifted up the ocean there, that's something else. So I think the first thing is, I came to this verse with the understanding that whatever happened there, it was not in the ocean, it was on the river Nile. And if you've seen the river Nile, you will agree with me that the river Nile can at times be seen as a sea and a beach. It is extremely wide. It is kilometers wide at some places. And it is so vast and wide. It's a very big river. And I'm not even talking about where those dams are on the Nile. Okay, so let's continue. Why am I standing still here and want to deal with this? I then sat obviously with the challenge that why would God save these people but not apply that same type of power, demonstration of power for other people and for other nations? Why only then? So it's a good question. I mean, that was 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. It makes it seem all the more that it was a lie. All right, now to come to the translators. The translators are sitting with this dilemma. The translators are dealing with Hadith. All right, the translators are working from Hadith books, and Hadith books are what is the lens through which they read the Qur'an. It should be the other way. The Hadith should be read with the lens of the Qur'an. You shouldn't be putting on Hadith lenses and reading the Qur'an. It should be the other way around. The Qur'an is described itself as kitabun mubinun. Right? It is a clear and enlightening book. It is not a book that needs to be enlightened by another book. It is the book that enlightens. Kitabun mubinun, al-kitabul mubin. So how can the mubin, the book that is meant to enlighten other books, or the book that is described as a furqan that becomes the measurement or the yardstick for other books, how can the yardstick be measured by other books? You see what I mean? But the Muslim translators, they do that, unfortunately. They use hadith to understand the Qur'an. And where do those hadith come from? Another unfortunate fact of history, and I've made videos about this, is if you look at Ka'b al-Ahbar, at Wahab ibn Munabbi, and many of these early so-called explainers of the Qur'an, they filled in the lack of understanding which they had with information they drew from the Torah and from the Talmud and from Christian texts. It's just a fact. When they read these verses, when these verses were being read and being shared and being discussed, a guy like Ka'b al-Ahbar, a guy like Abu Huraira, who was a student of Rabbi Ka'b, he used to visit the Rabbi Ka'b a lot. And you would go and double check. I'm not making things up here. Please, don't say, Anwar, this is outrageous. How can you say Abu Bakr was a student of a rabbi? He was. And go do your homework. Don't think you can follow the crowd and that's good enough. The crowd is taking you nowhere. So this guy, Abu Huraira, whose teacher was Rabbi Ka'b, he would go to Ka'b, and he spent many years under Ka'b, learning from Ka'b. Ka'b was apparently or ostensibly a Muslim by that time. But Ka'b never burnt his Torah. He never burnt his copies of the Talmud. He never burnt his Zohar and whatever other Jewish works he had in his possession. And these things are recorded, that Ka'b used to preach Islam in the mosque while his Jewish books were still on his bookshelf. So Ka'b al-Ahbar, Ka'b means Ka'b the rabbi, Abu Huraira was his student. Now imagine Abu Huraira comes and he asks him, listen, what is the story of Moses? And he comes with this Old Testament description of that story of the parting of the ocean. Number one, fictitiously describing the water that was crossed as the Red Sea. And as we will see now, fictitiously then also turning the whole story into some fabulous Hollywood sci-fi fantasy event. Now you have a problem right now as I'm speaking, because you are thinking God is able to commit or to accomplish any type of fantasy, any type of amazing supernatural feat. Yes, I know He's able to, but He doesn't do it. God does not work in that way. If He worked in that way, He would have given that gift to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. When the Quraysh were about to kill him, He would cause an intervention of nature to stop that from happening. When the Quraysh were about to murder or to wipe out the Muslims in Mecca, He would have sent an intervention to stop them. When the grandson of the Prophet was about to be slaughtered at Karbala, 87 of them, He would have sent an intervention like the parting of the Red Sea to rescue them. If you think that God operates by creating these supernatural, dramatic, natural events, then your religion is not going to sustain, it's not going to be sustainable in our times, because our children will be waiting for those natural events and not looking at what is the real nature of the story. So let's come to the verse then. Let me look at the verse and let me look at the Arabic, and let us make sense of this verse then. Now let's just look at the Arabic first. The Arabic says, فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى, and so we divinely communicated to Moses. أَنِضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرِ, that you should strike the Bahr. Strike using your stick the Bahr. The Bahr. Now we are here, right? The Bahr now. Strike using your stick the Bahr. Now, people now, when they see that, strike using the stick your Bahr, the issue that the image that comes up now is Moses that is now, holding up his staff or his rod, and that is the image that now is conjured up in their minds. Why would they have that image? Because that image comes from the Torah, and it comes from the Jewish rabbis, and it comes from Hollywood, who's also controlled by the by those who worship the rabbis. Why are we saying this? If I say to you in a normal way, listen, Muhammad, I want you to hit the road. I want you to hit the road. Okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to grab a stick and say, yeah, I hit the road? Why would you do such a silly thing? Why would you? Well, you wouldn't, because in communication there is this thing called metaphor and nuance, right? And people rob the Qur'an of metaphor and of nuance, or they make it over metaphorical, or they over trivialize it, make it overly rigid, or so now we're dealing with this translation here of فَأَوْحَيْنَا, we divinely communicated to Moses, أَن تَضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرِ, that you should hit the water body using your stick. Okay, now is the stick like a magic thing, or what is a stick? The simple, the simple understanding, if somebody was to tell you now, listen, Anwar, hit the road using your stick. Hit the road using your stick. What am I going to say? I'm going to hit the road with a stick? No, I'm going to take the stick and start walking, and maybe use the stick to clear the road or whatever, if there's any, right. But not just that. The word daraba in the Qur'an is used so many times. Daraba is the word idrib, right? Idrib bi'asak al-bahr. Strike or hit or tap or, knock. That is the word daraba. This word daraba is used numerous times in the Quran. And Allah often uses this term to speak about His own, when He strikes a metaphor. In Allah, la yastahi an yadrub mathalan. Allah will strike a metaphor or a similitude. And that is where the word daraba is used, for example. But there are many other places where Allah will say, إِذَا تَضَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, when you are out and about in the land. When you are out and about in the land. Out and about means when you traverse, when you travel, when you navigate. Then the word daraba is to navigate. So this word daraba is a very, very commonly used word. And even in our everyday language, if I say to you, I'm struck by your beauty, I'm struck by your beauty. It doesn't mean that you strike me with your beauty. It means I'm struck. I'm confronted. I'm exposed to your beauty. Right? I'm in awe of your beauty. And so we need to make sure that this word daraba is not read like a kindergarten child when we read the Qur'an. And that's the problem we have. The Qur'an has a vocabulary of 10,000 words, and the translators translated it, and their vocabulary is only 5,000 words. And so they are governed. They are governed and restricted by their own limitations. Let's make sense of this verse then. This verse says, فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَىٰ أَنِ اضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ. We said to Moses, strike with your staff, idrib, strike or hit with your staff, the waters. Not in any way intending to say that go and hit the water with the stick, but in fact meaning navigate the river. Navigate the river using your stick. Idrib bi'asakal bahr. Navigate the river using your stick. And now I'm going to prove it to you. You say, Anwar, now this is conjecture. No. Let me show you this verse. This is at a different point in the Quran. Chapter 20, verse 77. Where Allah says in this verse, I've just read it. We divinely communicated to Moses, set out at night and asir bi'ibadi fadrib. The same word there, adrib, strike. And strike for them a dry pass across the great river. Fadrib lahum tariqan fil bahr. Strike for them, set out at night with my servants, and strike for them a dry path across the great river. Fil bahr. And so, my friends, a different verse in the Qur'an comes to the rescue and gives us clarity over what the word daraba really mean when we look at this verse. So, فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَىٰ أَنِ اضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ. No ways does it mean take a stick and bang the ocean, bang the water, strike the water. That is the image you get from European and from fantastic stories in the Talmud, and from who's this guy, Grimm fairy tales, and from 1001 Arabian Nights. The Qur'an is not 1001 Arabian Nights. The Qur'an is not Grimm fairy tales. The Qur'an is not the old German, what is it called, the guys who wrote those old fairy tales. No, the Qur'an is a book that is rational, that is logical. And when it speaks about striking the water, it refers to navigate. Fadri bi'asak al-bahr. Navigate, using your stick, the water. Now we come to the big question. How did Musa cross the river? Because, if you look at this verse here, this verse here says, فَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ طَرِيقًا فِي الْبَحْرِ يَبَسًا. Yabasan. That is the important word. O Moses, and we divinely communicated to Moses, set out at night, go at night with my servants, and strike for them a dry pass across the great river. I've already done with you the great river. It was not the Red Sea. If you believe in the Red Sea, then you need to go and take the Torah, because then that is your holy book. You are reading the Qur'an through the lens of the Torah, and we don't read the Qur'an through the lens of the Torah. We read the Torah through the lens of the Qur'an. So, strike for them a dry pass across the great river. This is what is meant here. Now, the big question is, how on earth are you going to get a dry path across the river, across the Nile? How on earth? What's up with you, Anwar? What are you talking now? For that, I just thought, Allah will never disappoint us. Allah's book is going to stay logical, it is going to stay reasonable, it is going to stay rational for me. And I typed into Google, I said on Google, where on the river Nile is it possible to find a dry path across the river? Just did a silly, I just tried it, I have my phone, I have Google, I can ask anything, and I just thought, let me ask that question. And of course, this is the answer I got. This is the answer I received. I asked the question, is there any dry crossing across the Nile? That's my question. Is there any dry crossing across? And Google's answer is yes. There was a dry crossing across the Nile, a mass of floating vegetation that served as a bridge across the Nile River. The crossing was located about 10.5 miles downstream of Namule. The bridge was formed by vegetation that was brought down by floods and held up by a large rock in the middle of the river. The bridge was strong enough for elephants to cross. The last two bridges remained intact for 8 and 10 years respectively before being washed away by the floods. And this is AI, right? So this is Google using AI here. My friends, what do you think of that? What do you think of that? That Moses is instructed by Allah, by God Almighty, to use your rod and to explore, to navigate the river. And to navigate the river means if you're navigating a river, you're also navigating the side of the river, right? The bank of the river. And so yes, suddenly I'm getting closer and closer to the explanation. Moses was not asked to strike the water and to say abracadabra, and then the ocean is suddenly
Mighty hand!
If you believe in Hollywood, if you want to believe in the Torah, if you want to believe in fairy tales, then yes, go for it. Except that God at one point in history picked up the ocean and allowed 1,000 of his people to cross, but he will never do it again. And forever and a day, everyone else must die and must be killed by bombs and must be destroyed by all sorts of evil powers in the world. And his believers, his people will never ever be helped with such an amazing, extraordinary, godly kind of act. My friends, then you must accept the Talmud. Then you must accept the Torah if you want to believe like that. But if you want to believe that Allah guides through Hidayah, the Qur'an does not trade in supernatural feats and occurrences. Please, people. The Qur'an does not trade in that. That is what voodoo religion does. That is what fantasy, that what pie in the sky religion does. The Qur'an trades in Hidayah. What is Hidayah? Hidayah is direction, inspiration, ideas, revelation in the mind. And that is the stock that the Qur'an is making available to us. And it comes so much apparent in this particular example where Moses says to God, my dear Allah, what am I going to do? Help me to escape this onslaught. And God says to him, divinely communicated to Moses, in other words, speaks straight to him through his mind, through his soul. Set out at night, go at night with my servants, and use your rod and explore a dry path across the great river, and have no fear of being overtaken or any other worry. And then Moses gets that not as a huge supernatural sign, but he gets it as reassurance. The reassurance from God that don't worry, if you look, you will find a way to cross the river where it is possible to cross the river. Now, okay, I explained to you, or I showed you the Google possibility that there could be a bridge, a dry crossing across the Nile, and the example was given that if debris should be stuck, then that could make it possible. But my investigation into this matter also led me to another possibility. And in another search, I think on a different search engine or on Google, it also says that during the dry months in the catchment area of the Nile, which is higher up in Ethiopia and in Central Africa, in the dry months, a possible dry crossing also becomes possible at what is called the Nile cataracts. What is the Nile cataracts? And this is why I'm saying it took me a week to understand one verse. What is the Nile cataracts? You see, the Nile, in my mind, when I think of the Nile, I think of a very, very calm, sanguine, smooth, peaceful, flowing river, a mighty river that flows very calmly. And I when I was in Egypt, you could see the boats going up and down the river. It allows for boat navigation. And I just thought to myself, but the Qur'an says here that Moses should go and find a dry path across the river. Now, where on earth is there a dry path across the river? And I'm excluding now the possibility that it could be branches and stuff, a natural bridge that formed. Is there another more permanent dry crossing? And it brought me to the idea of the Nile cataracts, not eye cataracts, Nile cataracts. And in the story of the Nile, in the way what are Nile cataracts? You see, about 800 kilometers upstream. In other words, if you look at the map at Egypt and you go down the map with your finger, right, that is upstream, right? The Nile flows down. It actually flows up on the map. So if you go upstream, which means you move your finger down the map, Egypt down, upstream on the Nile, 800 kilometers there is the first cataract, which is the first of about 6 rapids. Now the Nile, it turns out, does have points where it becomes quite turbulent and quite rough, the waters. I'll show you an example of how it. You see, here's a picture of one of the cataracts, and it is one of the areas. Can you see? It's a rocky part of the Nile, and it turns out that the Nile is not actually as smooth and it is as sanguine and as just a docile as we always imagine the Nile. And there are actually pieces of the Nile that are quite turbulent. And here's an example. Rocky patches in the middle of the Nile. And then why I had to further question this is because this verse that I was translating was more complex than I thought. Take a look at this verse. فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَىٰ أَنِ اضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ. This is now the other verse, right? I looked at this verse, the previous one. It said, this is more straightforward. It says, this is 20:77. Just keep your bearings there. 20:77 says, وَلَقَدْ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَسْرِ بِعِبَادِي فَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ طَرِيقًا فِي الْبَحْرِ. This one says, strike a path for them along or through the river. And a dry path. Right. Now this verse here that is the focus of this discussion, 26:63, is not, it says, فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَىٰ أَنِ اضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ. And this is now my translation. We divinely communicated to Moses to navigate the river using your rod. You see, there's my updated translation. It's not to strike the river using your rod. It's to navigate the river using your rod. The river then split فانفلق. فانفلق. Now they say fanfalaka means it's the ocean, it's split into two giant bodies of water. Fanfalaka. But why? Falaka is not. Falaka means to self-divide or to crack or to open or to subdivide. You easily, when you describe a river as subdividing, when I say to you, listen, I saw the river yesterday subdividing. I saw the river yesterday and it split. Are you going to say to me, wow, Anwar, did the river open up and then water on this side and water on that side and then the river was like split? No, that's the mind of a child, of a dreamer, of somebody that is detached from reality. What you are going to see when I say to you the river split, you are going to see the river becoming into different arteries, into different experiencing islands in between. The river fanfalaqa, the river split. It went into different sections. The river split up. And when you have traveled the Nile, you will see often the Nile, you come to a point and then the Nile goes right and the Nile goes left. There's an island in Egypt itself, in Cairo itself, called Zamalek, where the river splits and there's an island in the middle. That is also falaq. It is a splitting of the river. فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ. Every part, firq means a part, a chunk, a section, a patch. كُلُّ فِرْقٍ كَالطَّوْدِ الْعَظِيمِ. Now the Qur'an doesn't say like these guys here have all explained, like mountains, the water, and it appeared like a mountain vast, and it was like a mountain vast. Because this is, their minds are now, they are not original. They are thinking to Charleston Heston, the movie that came out, right? And they're looking at the Torah. But if you look at this verse without those influences, then all you can say is this verse here, فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ, every patch being like rock solid high ground. كَالطَّوْدِ الْعَظِيمِ, the word tawd, الطَّوْدِ الْعَظِيمِ, الطَّوْد. Mintad means parachute. Tada means to go up, to elevate. So the tawd is that which comes out from the ground, which is elevated, which comes above, which is above the surface. Tawd al-azim. Azim means to be rock solid, to be firm, to be unassailable. And so that patches which come out from the river are solid and are firm. Solid and firm. And so, my friends, we therefore are dealing with this description here. We are dealing with this description here. The river fragmented in Falaqa. The river fragmented. It didn't go up into the sky and form mountains. The river fragmented. The patches, firq, the patches in the river were pushed out, were firm, solid elevations. As you can see here, this is a picture of a cataract in the Nile. My friends, I hope you are starting to see the picture here, that what happened is not that God split the ocean, lifted the ocean up from the shore, from the bottom of the sea, and raised it up into the sky and allowed one group of people to be saved. No wonder they act like they are God, because God did them such a big favor. You see, for us to even contemplate freeing ourselves from the yoke of Talmudism, of Zionism, of the choke that Jewish scholarship has on our thinking, on our minds, a choke which they've exercised right from the time after the Prophet ﷺ died, when Ka'b al-Ahbar became an authority on the Qur'an, which he was never given by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. When all these jokers, Wahab and Munabbi, when all these jokers, these people who are rabbis, started teaching you your Qur'an, that is where the problem crept in, because now subliminally, you are made to believe that they received such a great station by God that you can only ever hope to try to be close to what they were. And when you see your people being mowed down, being bombed, being incinerated by phosphorus bombs and by, half-ton or 1,000-kilogram bunker buster bombs, children, villages, tents are being burned by these people, you are going to question your God, my friends, if you don't clarify your mind. Why is this necessary? In conclusion, why is it necessary for us to clarify these things? You see, if we don't clarify these things, it's going to put doubts in the minds of our youth that God is there for the Israelites, but He's never there for you. In other words, God doesn't care. If He's there, He doesn't care. You are forsaken. You are believing balderdash, the Jews, really, they are the favored people. And then gradually we will become Wahhabi Salafists because we will become like them. We will become cruel, indifferent, rigid, religiously intolerant, because we will start becoming like them, because we will worship them actually subliminally. But if we believe that God's power to you, God's gift to you, is not in parting the ocean, but in comforting you that there is a dry path across this river, keep going. Use your stick, use your rod, knock away the branches, knock away everything, feel the depth, get the stone place where the stones are, and that is where you cross the river. If we see the power of God in giving us answers, solutions, making us think our way through our challenges, not bomb our way or die our way. Yes, there's a place for fighting and for the sword. I'm not a what you call it, a peacenik or a Gandhiist satyagrah. I believe that violence is required at some points, and I myself was a soldier in a war, in this war in our land, and I do not believe in applying violence where it is not required. But 9 out of 10 times it is not violence that is required to address any problem. And in fact, 99 out of 100 times you need to apply your mind rather than your sword or your gun. And we as Muslims, we have 2 solutions. Because we have done this Talmud or Torah reading of the Qur'an, we believe that we hang out for a miracle. God will send, lightning on them. So we wait for that. Or God will make the ocean part, or whatever miracle. That is what we're waiting for. It's not going to come, by the way. Number 2, we wait for some Messiah character, like the Mahdi will come. The Mahdi will save us. Now, I'm not denying that there is a righteous leader that is to come. Yes, I accept that inevitably a truly righteous, upright ruler will come about. It is only inevitable that a righteous leader will emerge. We will stop waiting for the righteous leader. We will stop waiting for God to fight, and we will start thinking. And that's the problem with our Muslims throughout the world, Shia or Sunni, is that we wait for miracles or we wait for Mahdis. Instead of sitting down, working with each other, whether you're a Wahhabi, whether Saudi, whether it's Iranian, whether you're a Palestinian, whether you're a Russian, let us sit together and collaborate. Ta'awun. Let us put our heads together. This is what the West has done. Let's put our heads together. Let's put our minds together. Let's think hard. Let's call on God to guide us. And then let us implement the solution that we think is best, that God can inspire us with. This is what the story of the parting of the river Nile, or the parting of the ocean as they call it, what it entails. It entails finding the solution. There is a solution. Exerting every effort to seek that solution, and then to find that solution and to outsmart and outwit the enemy. Now, just as a closing remark, you see this verse here ends off with the words. First of all, it says, navigate the river using... The river then split, with each dry patch being like rock solid high ground. Remember, it's the picture I showed you. And then it says something very, very important. Verse 64 says, to that same spot we drew the other party. Now the forces of arrogance, the forces of evil, were brought to the same place. Moses and all those with him we saved. The others we then drowned. Now you know what the explainers of the Qur'an will use the Torah as their basis, because they use the Hadith, and the Hadith is often informed by the Torah. I mean, I told you, Ka'b al-Ahbar, Wahab bin Nabbi, they come with the Torah and they impose that into the Hadith. They plant that in the Hadith, and then you read it and you think that is the Prophet Muhammad was. No, I made videos about this. Often what Abu Huraira spoke was not what he heard from the Prophet Muhammad, but what he heard from Ka'b al-Ahbar after the Prophet's death. So, the enemy, in this case, in the story of the parting of the ocean, or the crossing of the river Nile, the dry crossing as the Qur'an calls it, was far too impatient, far too arrogant to... they use force instead of finesse. Whereas Moses was instructed to use finesse, use your rod and find a safe crossing. They thought, no, we will just storm across the water. We have the power, we have the boats, we have the chariots, we have the men, we can just storm across. And today we learn from history that the points in the Nile that are most dangerous for navigation, for boat navigation, are in fact the cataracts. The cataracts are the points where most boats actually went down, where they were capsized, because the water at the cataracts are extremely violent, extremely turbulent. There's many waterfalls there. And I personally don't see the Pharaoh as coming there with his chariots and his horses. I see him coming there on his boats. And when he reaches the cataract, he's arrogant enough to believe he can pursue them. And that is where the Qur'an says, because of their lack of finesse, because of their arrogance, because of their forcefulness, they couldn't cross the river as did Moses and his band of followers, the servants of God. They then suffered the violence of that river, and they drowned there. But what Hollywood and what the Torah wants to tell you is that they come with this story. This is how they see. Check this, where Moses actually, this is how they see it. Moses actually goes into that deep, deep, deep belly of the ocean. Sorry, not Moses, Pharaoh. They want you and me to believe that when you see this water like this here, right, that Pharaoh in fact thought, no, it's a good idea now for me to go and cross that 80 kilometers, 60 kilometers, I don't know how long, whatever long, because the Red Sea is super long. The Red Sea is not 100 meters, my friend. You see, you need to corroborate your understanding of the Qur'an with reality, not with fantasy. So imagine you are now this clever Pharaoh, king with the most intelligent advisors. Will you do this silly thing here. Take a look at this now.
Here, take him.
Grandfather, look! The horses are coming!
The chariot. Ah! Run, run, run behind! Run!
Better to serve the Egyptians than to die here.
Who shall withstand the power of God?